So thanks for joining. Yes, we're going to talk about the toolchain, and that is the software toolchain, and the challenges that it can present. And I'll offer some ideas about how we view at Gitlab you can get around those challenges. First, though, my name is Dan Gordon. I'm a manager of the technical marketing team at Gitlab. I've been on both sides of the DevOps divide. I've been a system administrator, network administrator, security administrator, developer, release manager, product manager, technical marketer, and always a DevOps evangelist. I'm from San Jose, California in the US, so please don't hold that against me. So first, let's start. I think, actually, I'm going to go back. I'm going to ask you guys some questions. You got to know, I gave you a little bit about me. So if I could see a show of hands, how many of your organizations are using software in some way to be competitive? Just about all of you, as I'd expect. And how many of you have a project or an initiative of some sort to do digital transformation in your org? Okay, about half. Okay, good. So digital transformation, it's a buzzword, it's not a buzzword, it means, it's starting to form in what that really means. It's rooted in our ability to deliver change quickly, and that's because of software. The business landscape is littered with companies that have been put to pasture because they could not adapt fast enough to the competition. The World Economic Forum defines digital transformation as a driving force that creates new customer experiences and outcomes, new efficiencies in almost every industry, and new business models. So it's not just about delivering software faster. It's not just about having everything on computers. It's about digitizing your information. It's about how you look at your business models and how you give customers the experiences that they're expecting. And the digital world, particularly driven by software, has a great effect on that and has accelerated all of this. So IDC expects that in 2020 that there's going to be $2.4 trillion spent in digital transformation. And the root of that is, as I mentioned, in our ability to change and what we present as services, as products, in order to differentiate ourselves, in order to rise above the competition. Mark Andreessen of Netscape fame coined the phrase that software is eating the world. He said that, I don't know, many years ago. And it turned out to be pretty prescient. We see that all over the place. You've probably heard the discussions before. Amazon, took out bookstores and now all of retail practically, Airbnb hotels, Uber taxis, it goes on and on and on. And so that was pretty accurate. He knew what he was talking about. What he really meant was successful companies are going to be reliant on software to differentiate and to become successful. He also said cycle time compression may be the most underestimated force in determining winners and losers in tech. And by tech, he means companies that develop and release software of any sort, which is pretty much all companies at this point. So let's look at that a little bit, because he was also very dead on with this. What is cycle time? Cycle time is the speed at which you can come up with an idea of value and actually get that turned into value and delivered to the customer. Now, compressing that is very important because every time we do a cycle, we have an iteration. And the more iterations we do, the quicker we can adapt our plan towards where we need to get to. And that's really what the picture here is showing. When we, do I have a pointer? When we start, I don't have a pointer. When we start at a point, if we start with a plan, and the plan is we're going to do some work for 6 months, a year, whatever it is, and we're going to hit that target. Well, usually, first of all, that target is wrong because it's really down there. Because when we start, we know the least about what we're trying to do, right? We learn as we go. So that's the least logical time to actually lay out the whole plan. Right, and this is what Agile taught us. Agile also taught us many things about iteration, and the key is these small little purple arrows. That's iteration. And the reason that that's very valuable is because not only does it allow us to adapt our plan to where it ultimately should have been, but it allows us to adapt as we're doing our development, as we're making our features, because the world changes around us, and at a faster rate than ever before. which means that that second orange circle might have been the right place, and we might have been able to arc ourselves towards it. But as we were doing that, the user needs changed, or the environment changed, or the competition changed. A new technology got introduced, and so now we need to adjust. So the tighter we can make our feedback loop, the tighter we can make our iterations, the better we can hit the target, what we need to get to. And our competitiveness basically then depends on the ability of our teams that are creating software to get their code out as quickly as possible and into the hands of customers and users where we can get feedback and figure out what the next cycle looks like. This is especially important because if you're off track when you start, as we just discussed, you can have significant investments before you realize that you need to change direction if you're not iterating quickly. So there's a cost piece to this too. So software is accelerating the rate of innovation. We're moving in increasingly smaller steps so that we can be adaptive. Software developers realize this, and this is where Agile kind of came from, right? We moved from waterfall notion, which was really kind of the big leap, the big plan, to Agile while we were making smaller and smaller improvements. And Agile kind of grew out the need for DevOps because we could create software in cycles, but we also needed to be able to deliver it so that customers could get hold of it, so we could get feedback, so we could make adjustments. And that is where a lot of organizations finally over the last several years started realizing that's what we need to do. We can't just do Agile, we need to do DevOps. And so what happened is over the last 7 to 10 years, organizations started embarking on how are we going to do DevOps. They started trying different things, bringing in tools, learning together, changing the culture, changing the teams. And what we found in looking at this is that $3.8 billion, this was as of 2018, were spent on DevOps software, the different pieces and components. But still, greater than 50% of our team's times are spent doing logistical and repeated tasks that were not value add to the eventual product. And so Gartner did a study, and they came out with almost 90% of the organizations that started down the path of DevOps were disappointed with the results. Now, you could definitely argue this is, there's always heightened expectations when a new technology or idea comes out. But still, that's pretty bleak. So we had a theory. We said, with all the thousands of customers that we work with that are using our tool and that we look at what they're doing and we talk with them, what we found was the tool chain was the challenge. The tool chain was the challenge because they knew what the problems were they needed to solve, and they had a sense of the solution that they needed to at least head towards. But in between, they had to put together the pieces, or they chose to put together the pieces. You guys might be looking at this and going, I have that, oh, and I have that, and I have that. And I wire them together like that, right? And that was where a lot of the challenge was. We found that the tool chain created multiple data models. It created complexity, or it does create complexity and risk, because when any one of those versions changes, it has the potential to affect the rest of the tool chain. And they're all created independently of their own, of their own versioning and their own cycles. Security is maintained separately across those different pieces. The tools actually create silos. In DevOps, we're trying to eliminate silos, but when you have a tool that a developer uses and a different tool that an operations uses and a different tool that a security person uses, and they each feel comfortable in their home tool, now you have data silos. You have lack of transparency. You have teams that can't see into the other tool because it's not their tool. Even if they're integrated together, you can only get so much data, and then there's a discussion about authentication and authorization across them. So lots of challenges coming out of that, but we didn't want to just go with our experience. So we talked to a third party. We asked Forrester Consulting. We commissioned them to do this past year a study of application development and delivery organizations and looking at their software tool chains. They talked to managers, team leads, directors, 60% US, 40% UK around, large or medium-sized companies to large to a few very large. And they found a lot of interesting things, one of which was that ultimately the people in the organization that were maintaining these tool chains were the development teams and the DevOps teams at a pretty high percentage, 71%, that they had some responsibility to make sure this tool chain existed and worked properly. And that meant they had to spend their time doing that instead of actually innovating and working on the product that they're supposed to be working on. We also found that those integrations came in different ways, but they all involved a bit of labor. Plugins, great, but scripts as well. A lot of writing to APIs, and then even some hard-coded custom integrations. And this is what we call the toolchain tax. This is the challenge of having a lot of tools that have to be integrated together to create a particular capability around DevOps. The time and cost to acquire all these different point tools, whether you're pulling them out of open source or having a discussion with a vendor, the time and cost to integrate all of these tools once you've tested and validated and said this is the tool I want to use, the time and cost to train all the users on the different tools. And then there's user context switching. Now I have my tool chain in place, I've done all my integration, and I turn it over to my users. And now as they go through their daily work, they're switching between these tools and they have to keep context switching. And then there's also, of course, the time and cost to administer all these tools because somebody has to keep them upgraded and secure and talking to each other. So this breeds challenges, complexity and bottlenecks, inefficiency, manual processes, trying to get around integrating or getting information from one tool to the next sometimes. Functional silos, as I mentioned earlier. Teams waiting for handoffs across the tools that may not be integrated yet. This breeds poor collaboration and communication because we have misaligned priority potential, duplication of work if we have multiple sources of truth or multiple areas where things are happening in two different tools. And oftentimes teams that aren't sure what's happening and who's doing what in which tool. We have to make, in this case, the challenge of unsatisfying trade-offs, sometimes security and compliance versus speed. And when that trade-off does happen, we get security breaches. And if we haven't, a lot of times what we see is we're going to integrate our tool chain, we'll get the first part done. We'll get SCM, we'll get CI, maybe CD, and we'll get to security. Hold on. This is enough. This is a lot, right? Security is expensive. Security is, important, but it oftentimes still is an afterthought or comes later in the integration cycle. And when that happens, then you're not finding your vulnerabilities early. Bugs get caught in production. They get caught later because they're not flagged universally across the whole team that's working on a piece of software, which can not do great things for morale as well. Lack of visibility and traceability. This is a huge one. Because now we have our teams, as I mentioned earlier, they're siloed. They're using separate tools. They're jumping the data across multiple tools. It's harder to identify bottlenecks. It's harder to troubleshoot. And it's expensive and time-consuming to do auditing and reporting because now you have multiple data stores of what's happening across your development lifecycle. So these lead to some unfavorable business outcomes, as you could imagine, poor quality in the products, being over budget because we're having to redo work, poor velocity, the teams are moving slower, waiting for each other, not having the visibility they need to just go forward, product launch delays, which can certainly cause lost opportunities and business disruption. And eventually, if we're not careful about it and we're never always delaying, and we're not getting the features or capabilities out that our customers are asking for, we lose market share. And so what's really needed is to have a consistent view and collaboration space for DevOps and security teams, for all the teams involved in the software delivery process. Allowing them all to see what they need to see without having to jump through hoops, change the authentication authorization across multiple tools, find the tool owner, et cetera. The ability to work in parallel across the tool in different parts, not have to wait for other teams because they just have the data that they need. For example, security vulnerabilities being directly accessible to the developer at the point of change empowers the developer to fix their problems before they get further down the line. Developers can get immediate feedback on their code changes. That would be great, right? If again, like the security example. Centralized reporting and visibility across the entire life cycle out of the box, right? We need that to be able to understand how our software engine is working. And without that, we are blind in different parts, and it's hard to actually optimize our software delivery cycle. So, and the solution, of course, has to scale. It has to match performance and cost demands of the organization, because we don't, if you have multiple tools and you need to scale, you have to scale multiple pieces, which means you have an even higher maintenance and licensing cost across all the pieces. So ideally, we don't have to have that. So a complete DevOps platform in a single application would be easier to use, single user interface, users that have one login and authorization. You'd streamline training and onboarding. And importantly, your teams, or even across teams, can have common workflow, which you don't get if they're all in separate tools or separate CI systems. And that can be something like a best practice flow. Gitlab, for example, offers a best practice workflow for DevOps right out of the box, drop and go. And teams can use that consistently, or they can create their own. And that gives us a consistent and measurable set of data that we can use to improve and optimize our processes. The setup is easier because the installation and configuration is just one thing, one data store, one vendor to manage or to choke. It's easier to maintain and upgrade because there's a single code base, a single upgrade, and a single license. So seamless collaboration is what we ultimately need. What does that mean? That's working from one source of truth, same priorities, with shared visibility and urgency. And that, of course, yields a lot of great advantages, just a few high-level ones here. The projects get delivered on budget and on time. They increase customer satisfaction because we're able to actually get their changes that they've requested to them in a timely manner, and that leads to increased market share and revenue. So we've seen this before. I'm not making this up. We've seen this in action before. 2007, I don't know if that means anything to anyone. Before 2007, we all had individual tools in our personal productivity tool chain, right? We had a phone, we had a calendar, had a separate camera. So you know where I'm going with this probably, but imagine back in the day before this happened, you wanted to take a picture and send it to somebody, email it to somebody. You had to take your camera out, hopefully digital. You had to put your chip in, take your picture, take the chip out, put the chip in the reader, plug the reader into your computer, unload that file from the chip to your computer, bring up your mailer, create the mail, put the, upload or select that picture off your computer, and then send. Now, I don't even need to explain today what it takes to do exactly what I just described, because we all have it in our pockets, right? And the iPhone was the first real one that did it well with a good user interface, and there's obviously lots of different options out there. But it was a single solution for your personal tool chain, right? It took all those point tools, the phone, the calendar, the email, the camera, music, web browsers, alarm clocks, and just kept growing and growing. And it put them all into one single intuitive user interface that had one data model in the back end that they were able to integrate cleanly the whole UI and the whole user experience. And even better, out of that emerged new capabilities, mobile mapping, social media and networking at the scale that we have, location services, streaming media, mobile e-commerce, reservations, ride sharing, you name it. There's so many different things that emerged because of all those things were in one platform tightly integrated together. So GitLab is an option. It's an example of what I've been talking about. Not surprised. GitLab is a complete DevOps platform as a single application. We take point tools such as project management, SCM, CI/CD, issue tracking, container registries, security scanning, license management, and compliance, and roll that all into one single platform. We present it as a single application. It's got one intuitive user interface. It's got one data model. And of course, it can do integrations just like the iPhone and everything else can. But we also see new capabilities coming out of that. Things like concurrent development, things like moving security left out of the box by default without having to do those integrations. Full accountability and traceability, because anything that's done anywhere on the platform is all being stored in a central tracking repository. Cycle time measurement, transparency, complete DevOps built right in. I'm not going to go over the details here, but this is just a taste, an example of the types of capabilities across the board that GitLab has integrated in as one package. More coming. And the point is, this is not just made up stuff. There's a lot, thousands of large customers, enterprises, that are taking advantage of the fact that they're not having to piece together their tool chains. And they're getting a large advantage out of GitLab, out of this single platform, out of this single application. The analysts have looked at it and said, they've described us with words such as innovator, visionary, leader, because as Forrester said in the last Cloud CI, Cloud Native Continuous Integration wave just this past year, GitLab's approach of a single application to manage the entire all the phases of the software development comes through in the developer experience as squarely a leader. Now, I'm not saying that to toot my horn. I'm saying that because I want to give a little gravity to this idea, because it's counterintuitive. We're used to this idea that you build up lots of components out of little pieces. But there is a value here in making them all come together cleanly. This is Gartner peer reviews. These are unsolicited votes and comments from our users, who apparently love us too, because in 2 years in a row they've said, this is right, this makes it easy, this makes it work. So leading enterprises have tamed their DevOps tool chains by moving to a platform that covers what they need it to cover with a single interface. And there are, under GitLab's customer site, there's lots of testimonials and discussions and references about how they, the stories, the use cases about how that they did that and what it was like for them. And I encourage you to go check those out. And that is it. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Dan.